After first playing this, what I wanted to do was to go again through the piece in terms of the emotions, bring emotions, emotions a 19-year-old later day teenager can have at that age. So how many emotions did someone feel the music expressed throughout the piece? Anyone have an idea of how many they might have heard?
3 or 4 at least.
Yeah. Well, the last count I got to 17. And I thought, well, how do we even have that many emotions? You know, you've got happy and sad and anxious and so on and so forth. And I started counting them up and I thought, well, there really are lots of emotions. So from the beginning, things are going pretty smoothly. You know, there's nothing really, no angst really happening at this point. And the beginning of the piece, to me, sounds like a barcarolle. And that's a form of music that is a water piece on a boat with waves lapping up at the side of the boat as it goes through usually pretty tranquil waters. So Rozsa brings this out in the beginning by having the waves, the slow waves, happen twice before the melody even comes in. He does it twice, then the melody. And it goes on. So these waves in the left hand continually go all through the first 2 pages into the second line of the third page of the piece. And what happens to me emotionally at this point, everything's fine. You know, the young man is sitting back and contemplating the future or whatever, and things are really quite smooth. But within that, the second time this passage occurs, suddenly we have an augmented chord back to major. So that augmented chord that just creeps in for a few beats is like a little motion of angst, like maybe things aren't going to be okay after all. Then he goes back into major, and then after one bar of that, comes back again. And here he's in the minor key. It's not an augmented chord, it's a minor chord. And minor chords we often think of as actually being sad, or more anxious to me than the music that even came before. So we have the minor sound. After introducing it and going back and forth a little, now he's really wavering back and forth within it continually, one after the other. So he's accelerating his anxiety over something anyway. And so the music continues. What was that? Does that trigger any emotion with anyone? Well, it's a sudden change. And that's another thing that happens in this piece. Changes are gradual, like I just showed you the passage where it's gradual. Now we have a sudden change. And all of us can do that, but I think teenagers can have sudden changes, emotions quite frequently and easily as well. So at any rate, coming out of this minor key in the right hand, the left hand No. There we go. We have a major key in the left hand, a minor key in the right hand. So he's mixing emotions here. He's really not sure where he's going with it. So he just lets it all go. Let's let it go. Let's do this. I think everything's going to be fine. Now relax a little. To me, that's another emotion that has occurred really rapidly in the piece. And then he just decides to relax. Okay, let's put all that behind us. So there's a long pause, and then a brand new theme and mood of music occurs right after that. So here we have, to me, that's a new mood. I could use several words to describe it, but counting so far, 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 4 moods already, Tom. So, and we're just on page 3 of 9. Okay, so here we go. Here's the 5th mood, this new sound that happens at this point. And what happens with this, it's a long passage. We could call it the second theme or the second section of this really elaborately constructed work. He finally comes out of it like this, and there's another surprise. In other words, it's not a gradual change, it's a sudden change. To me, that's sort of a reflective remuneration on something. I've had this before, and what's coming next? That's just the way it impresses me with what the music's doing here. And it does go back and forth a little during these 2 bars. And then we have a surprise. And to me, all of that's sort of joyous and exuberant. So there's 2 more emotions that we have, you see. And then after that, during this passage, we've had, the waves have been gone unless these, that's like waves that are suddenly have hit the boat after totally calm waters, but then that dies down. So what happens after this ecstatic, which is another emotion, passage with the high trills? It goes into a passage where the waves now are faster, occurring faster, and then the right hand and the melody, the main theme from the beginning of the piece, is in the left hand. And you hear in the right hand, to me, that's just faster waves. So the wave motif comes back again, and at the end of it, he has another sudden crashing. Maybe this is crashing waves. And then suddenly the beginning comes back. Okay, let's have it the way it was at the beginning and forget any angst. And so this is a complete repetition of the first section of the piece. It's literal, going all the way. And once again, we have the slower waves again in the left hand. So at the end of this section, it ends very much like the other one was beginning to end. And here, we have that, but the first time it occurred, it was this way. So we went further with it the first time. The second time, he repeats it at one level, and only then goes up another level. And musically, what that tells me, well, I'm going to do something different. I've done that before. I'm considering something different this time, and it's not quite as tremendous as, or different perhaps, that happened before. And so a new section written con bravura, which means bravely, bravura, it's a musical term anyway. And I like to start it off not totally bravura, but work into it so it has more effect. So after this. What emotion does that generate? Does anybody have an idea?
Anticipation?
Excuse me?
Anticipation?
Okay, yeah. I think there's some joy and happiness in it too. It sounds pretty happy to me in a way. And so this music builds up to the climax of the piece that comes right after it. And once again, the climax is a surprise. It's not gradual. It's something that he pauses and then goes into. And we've had other instances where the music pauses and then announces something suddenly quite different. So at the end of this section, and then a long pause, and then the climax. On after that, you see, we have a sudden quiet relaxation after the climax of the piece, and then some joyous chords at the end that say, which is a joyous finish to the piece after all the different things we've gone through. So when I first was studying this piece, I just wanted to learn the notes, and I noticed the different sections of the piece and how they had different characters or whatever. But then it was sometime later that I started thinking, spring emotions, it's plural, let's find the emotions. And so I went through the piece like I've shown it to you, which has really been a pleasure. So I think that's quite an achievement for a 19-year-old. Okay. So let's see, I think I have a talk I'm supposed to give too. That originally was what I was supposed to be doing here. Give a talk, and then they said, well, play some music too. So thank you all for coming. I first want to acknowledge and thank members of the TU faculty and others whose assistance and various contributions have made this wonderful venue possible this evening. Dr. Judith Rayford, director of our music school here. Ali John Jamchi, who is the Director of Composition and Film Studies at the university. Roxana Rocha Lorton, without whom we wouldn't have this wonderful building. She has a tummy virus and couldn't come after all, so I'm sad she isn't here. Roger Price, are you here, Roger?
Right here.
Oh, very good. Okay, glad to meet you. He provided me this score, which is written out in professional software rather than the original manuscript I would have played from otherwise. And Tom Bronlick, is that the correct pronunciation? Okay.
Yes.
He's a chess master and also the master organizer of this event. So hats off to you too, Tom. If Roxana had been here, since she's Rocha's daughter, I was going to say, well, if anything I say about Rocha's inaccurate, just interrupt and correct me, but I don't have to worry about that. So, for one of the 3 required doctoral recitals at OU, I had the option to play a lecture recital, which would require far less music to prepare due to the lecture involved. I declined, would rather simply walk on stage, play, bow, and exit. Fortunately, since then, I've had many opportunities to speak to concert audiences. Having so many friends here this evening, some I haven't seen in many years, makes this event for me even more pleasing. I never dreamed then in 1981 that I, in 2025, would be here at TU giving such a presentation to an audience of chess players and musicians. I hope that tonight's personal memories of times I shared with Bela Rozsa will open at least a small window that isn't available on the internet or elsewhere. I've been thrilled, honored, and humbled after being asked to speak about my late professor and friend. Tulsa University has both an annual Bela Rozsa Memorial Concert Series and an annual Bela Rozsa Composition Contest for university students. The annual Bela Rozsa Trophy Chess Tournament is another fitting testament to his music and chess legacy, to which I'm proud to contribute today. So I'd like to share some of my favorite music quotes with you to get started. Pierre Boulez has said, "Music is a labyrinth with no beginning and no end, full of new paths to discover where mystery remains eternal." Karl-Heinz Stockhausen has said, "Art is a way of perceiving the world, the disclosing of the mysterious." Einstein said, "The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science." And Garry Kasparov said, "Chess is one of the few arts where composition takes place simultaneously with performance." And that's also a music quote as well as a chess quote that I really like a lot. I suppose it could be argued that musical improvisation also fits this definition, but unless a composer provides a score or written instructions, I think most musical improvisers feel during their improvisation that they're improvising, not composing. In contrast, Arnold Schoenberg said, "Composing is a slowed down improvisation. Often one cannot write fast enough to keep up with the stream of ideas." So those are some thoughts that I would preface what I'm doing here today. So maybe I'll perform an improvisation for you right now, a short one, and see what happens. Okay, it's a long talk. I think that's enough. Get to choose here today. Okay, so this was from 1938 when Bela Rozsa was being introduced to Baylor University when he first started his teaching career there. Presenting Bela Rozsa, distinguished concert pianist and composer, who now joins the faculty of the Music School of Baylor University, September 19, 1938. Toured Europe in his teens as a soloist and accompanist for his celebrated father, baritone of Berlin, Vienna, and Budapest Royal Opera Houses, later of the Metropolitan. Was graduated with highest honors from the Institute of Musical Art of the Juilliard School in 1928. That's when he was only 23. Is the composer of numerous published works, including compositions for string quartets and quintets, symphonic poems, sonatas, concertos for piano and organ, concertos, and other brilliant modern forms. Has appeared over radio in some 2,000 programs. Has recently been associated with the Italian Academy of Music in New York City. Is recognized as an outstanding authority in the field of modern composition, being highly endorsed by the famous Juilliard School of Music of New York, and by such eminent personages as Arnold Schoenberg, Rudolph Kolisch, and others, and was presented on June 12th in New York City as a featured artist on Composers Forum Laboratory Program, receiving the most flattering press comments from critics of the New York Times and other metropolitan journals. And that's the end of that document. Something that could have been also included in this presentation was that in 1928, Bela won the Seligman Prize for Composition, which was a big deal back in the 20s and 30s, which allowed him to study in Paris with Nadia Boulanger, at that time the most prestigious composition teacher in the world. Among her students were Aaron Copland, Philip Glass, David Diamond, Virgil Thompson, Elliott Carter, Roy Harris, who born in Oklahoma, they call him from Oklahoma, Walter Piston, and others. Bela taught at the University of Tulsa School of Music from 1945 to 74. He began his musical studies at the Liszt Academy in Budapest, and at age 13 he began to accompany his father in concerts. 2 years later, in 1921, the family came to the United States, where his father joined the New York Metropolitan Opera. A year later, his father died from food poisoning from tainted oysters while on tour with the opera. The online information just says he passed away suddenly. And so in a telephone conversation a year ago with Roxanne, I asked her what actually happened, and he said it was oysters that he ate one evening. As a teenager, Rozsa then supported himself and his mother, working from a stock boy up to a movie pianist, playing in one of those cheap uptown theaters. And what's a movie pianist? Well, in the silent days, you had a piano in there, and the pianist would look at the screen and improvise music that sounded like what you've seen. You've probably seen things on YouTube that actually do that too. I'm reminded of my late friend Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, who at age 17, when World War II ended, did the same thing. He came back to Cologne right after the war. It was all bombed out. Both of his parents were killed in the war. And he told me he had a grandmother and a milk cow. That was what he came back to. And so he also played in a movie house and this type of piano thing. Dr. Rozsa was also an avid and passionate chess player. In 1940, he won the North Texas Championship, and twice in 42 and 48, tied for first place in the prestigious Southwestern Open. He was a 10-time Oklahoma State chess champion, and in 1952, won the 10th Grand National Correspondence Chess Tournament, a 10-year event in which 1,000 players competed. Of course, it took 10 years because you didn't have email back then, it was postcards. And so I think the postcard must have had to have a date posted on it when it was mailed or you forfeited. Bela was my major professor when I was a graduate student of music composition here at TU from 1968 to 70. In 1970, I won the TU Student Composition Contest with a solo piano piece called Transition, a very contemplative 12-tone piece. Rozsa's challenge for my master's thesis after that was to orchestrate transition for piano and orchestra. And, you know, a flashy virtuoso piece would be easy to write an orchestral part for, but a contemplative piece was a different challenge. So that's the challenge he gave me, and he did sign the master's thesis document to make it official. So it seems like I did a well enough job, but it was really a real challenge for me. I was surprised when I showed him what I'd done, and he would look, okay, that's fine. So I guess it was. But anyway, I call that piece Treatise for Piano and Orchestra. So Bela and I shared a lot of, I wouldn't call them inside jokes. There's one that I'll tell you about, but he had a real sense of humor, a very sophisticated sense of humor. So we had a lot of back and forth like that, and some of it got spilled over into the acknowledgement that I put in my master's thesis, which he did approve. So anyway, the acknowledgement, pretty far out, but it went like this. After acknowledging the superior intuitive unitive consciousness of the Oriental masters of light, past and present, as well as the wise yet slow Western masters of art, poetry, and music, from Vincent to Jackson Pollock, Walt Whitman to Allen Ginsberg, and Gesualdo to Karlheinz Stockhausen, I humbly bow with gratitude, admiration, and love before my benevolent teacher, Dr. Bela Rozsa, for not teaching me that which cannot be taught. After graduating, I moved away from Tulsa, but I returned in Tulsa to visit and play chess with Rozsa in 1971. This was the year before Bobby Fischer was going to play for the World Championship in '72, and every chess world was really coming alive with all of that. Before going outside to his high apartment balcony, perhaps halfway up the University Club Tower here in Tulsa, he first inquired about my young son, Naren, who was born in Tulsa in 1969. So he would have been 2.5 years old at that time. I thought that was really thoughtful of him to first inquire how my son was doing. He's here tonight, age 56. So, anyway, he then said, reading Freud's Totem and Taboo ruined everything for me. The only miracle you will ever experience is your children. So I have 3, and I can say they're miraculous. He seemed regretful, didn't elaborate further, and I was more interested in chess than Freud, so we played chess. When I first attended his classes, I noticed the framed awards on the walls of his studio, including one where he won the 10th U.S. Postal Championship, another a framed page from Chess Life. I recall the position was early in a Sicilian defense with the caption, "How does black proceed?" Not previously being aware of his chess background, I soon invited myself to his home to play chess one Sunday. We sat outside on his patio and played 2 games. The first, he looked at the board and quickly won. The second, he sat back and read the Sunday paper, glanced at the board a second or so after each of my moves, and easily won again. Being more interested in music composition at the time, I only played chess with him again 3 years later when I described in '71, a year after I'd completed my graduate work at TU and moved away, when the Fischer-Spassky World Chess Championship was coming soon, and my interest in tournament play was rekindled. He won the first game, but the second one was a draw and moved 55 in a rook and pawns endgame. He complimented me, saying, "You see everything." But as with my 55 move draw in a private game with D. Ballard, who was one of Oklahoma's first chess masters, in 1964, I feel both master strength players didn't follow through with winning or superior positions earlier in these games in order to allow me to play on into end games that truly became drawn. So I looked over those games, and I really feel they were being really kind to me. But with the boost this visit gave me, I started playing tournaments again. From 1972 to 97, I played around 350 tournament games. And to a musician, that might sound like a lot of games, but to a chess player, that's just getting started if you're a serious chess player. I won 3 tournaments. I played 7 tournaments with no losses and 22 with only 1 loss. So I really enjoyed playing when I could. Had some really fine games. One of the most amazing chess stories I know is Bela learning the game at age 34, and the next year in 1940 winning the North Texas Championship. Bela's first of 10 Oklahoma championships occurred in 1946, the year I was born. In 1950, Bela responded to an article by international master Edward Lasker. He wrote that musicians didn't make good chess players. Now, that's ridiculous. Rozsa challenged Lasker to a postal game and won. In 1953, he defeated international master Hermann Steiner in the U.S. Open in Milwaukee. Now we'll switch back to music. In the first class of every term, Rozsa announced to his students that no one in any of his classes would receive a grade of F. I was pretty astounded when he said that. He explained as follows. One afternoon, several years prior, after finishing his classes in the music building, he exited on his way home to find an inebriated and very unhappy former student with a gun waiting for him just outside the doorway. It was a student he'd given an F sometime in the past. And Bela described how they had a standoff that lasted an hour and a half before Bela talked his would-be assailant out of shooting him. So, no more Fs. I guess a D wouldn't look so good on your transcript anyway, so I think students did have some incentive to make grades. During lectures and conversations, Rozsa often mentioned Alfred Korzybski and semantics, but I never heard him expound it, known as the general theory of semantics. It states we're limited in our perceptions of reality by our nervous system and language. Decades later, when I was remembering this, I think around 2000, I bought a book by Ted Falconer about Einstein, Korzybski, and semantics. The book describes a tripartite understanding regarding three basic levels of sanity, with a distinction inserted between insanity and sanity. If you're basically in control, oh, I've skipped here, let me back up. If you're out of control, you're insane. If you're basically in control, but not completely sane, you're unsane. I think this can apply to many of us today. And in this light, true complete sanity is an ideal that many ever achieve. So it seems obvious to me that Bela's relationship to psychology and the philosophy of language was a lifelong concern, reflected in his 1943 doctorate at the University of Iowa, which was not only in composition, but also the psychology of music. So I think we were hearing the psychology of music in this piece by Rozsa today to quite an extent, even age 19. So I can see how that was a lifelong concern of his. With his references to Freud and Korzybski, I'm intrigued that he never mentioned Ludwig Wittgenstein, whose philosophy of language seems to me quite similar to Korzybski's general semantics. A recent internet search found an article entitled Wittgenstein and General Semantics by Stanford Berman, published in 1988. My impression is that Freud and Korzybski influenced Bela so deeply he felt no need for further inquiry. The other famous person Rozsa often mentioned was Arnold Schoenberg. I was told that Bela once gave a piano recital in Carnegie Hall where he played one of Schoenberg's pieces. Schoenberg was in attendance and came backstage to invite Bela to study privately with him, a rare distinction as Schoenberg ordinarily didn't accept private students at that time. Schoenberg's music was revolutionary in a manner that can be compared with both similar revolutions in chess and science. Hypermodern chess, a la Richard Ryti or Aaron Nimzovich, and their openings comes to mind because the center is often ceded to white or black, and the attack comes from the flanks. And I read that when that hypermodern approach first appeared, it was really revolutionary at the time. And in science, Schoenberg's revolutionary 12-tone theory in music, where all tones can have equal weight individually, but can cluster in infinite ways, is similar to Einstein's unified field theory in physics when compared to Newtonian physics. So, to give you an idea of what I'm talking about with that, in the chromatic scale, I'm sorry. Well, we played the left hand. Those are 12 different tones. And if we hear them that way or this way or whatever, they all have equal weight. But in tonal music, there's a hierarchy. So in tonal music, the keying in the key of C would be a C chord, would be the note C. The queen would be the G chord with the note G, which is a fifth up from C. And I think the rook would probably be F. He's stronger than the other chords, but not as strong as the queen, you see. So the rooks would be F. And the three remaining chords would be the, I guess it's 1, 2, 3, 4. The four remaining chords would be the knights and the bishops, the minor pieces, they're so called. Then the black keys, or the leftover notes, would be the pawns. So that's a simplistic way to look at how tonal music has a hierarchy within it. But with 12-tone music, which Schoenberg basically was the first person who really explored it in depth, and influenced Rozsa as well. Rozsa wrote 12-tone music as well. All of the notes are evened out. They're equally important to one another and have equal weight. And one aspect of that I appreciate so much is that anything can happen rapid fire, one after another, whereas in tonal music you usually have something occurring for a while that then changes into something else. It doesn't change even as rapidly, more rapidly than the changes we talked about in Rossa's piece. And harmony can also flash by much more quickly. Just in an instant you have one harmony, a note here or whatever, and it just opens up infinite possibilities. So it's a really incredible breakthrough in music that I really consider as important to music as these other breakthroughs in science were. I've read published correspondence between Rozsa and Schoenberg when Rozsa was on the music faculty at Baylor before coming to TU. They were very interested in promoting one another's careers in America and aiding other musicians and acquaintances who had fled fascism in Europe. So one day in Tyrrell Hall here on TU campus, between undergraduate students, I began practicing Schoenberg's Suite Opus 25 in my TU Music Building teaching assistant studio. I'd performed portions of this suite as an undergraduate elsewhere, but had never finished learning it. Soon after I started practicing, I opened it to find Bela standing there, who said with great enthusiasm, "You will endear yourself to me forever." So today I would say, how wonderful, Bela, that's great. But what I did back then was I said, yes, but I can't play the jig well enough. the last piece in it. So I don't know if this is a world first or not, but I'm going to practice now in front of you. Usually the pianists learn their pieces, they practice alone, and then, but I'm going to practice in front of you so I can play you some excerpts of what I was playing when Bela knocked on my door that day. I don't recall which of the pieces in this suite. There are 5 or 6 pieces in this suite, which means a collection of pieces. I don't remember which one I was practicing when he came to the door, so I'll give you an excerpt of several of them to show you what they might have sounded like. So what Schoenberg did in his Opus 25, he went back to the Baroque form of a suite, which was a series of dances, and each dance in those suites would be in a different meter, different time signature, and often some would be traditionally fast and others would be slow, whatever. And so in Schoenberg's Opus 23, he was a lot more far out in a lot of ways. And for some reason, 2 works later, he decides to go back to the Baroque era and fill it out with 12-tone music too. So anyway, this is how the first movement of that suite goes. And like I say, I'm just practicing and not performing. And the piece goes on from there, you see. So that's the beginning of the prelude. I might have been practicing that. The G, the gavotte rather, it's another Baroque form, a dance form that's in 2/2 time, begins like this. And it goes on from there. Sounds like we have drums in there or something. Okay. And there is an intermezzo. An intermezzo, I think, is more a romantic music term rather than Baroque. Maybe they had intermezzi in the Baroque era. I don't know for sure. But this piece, it's a slow piece. And it has a really neat special effect in the beginning. It has a chord that two of the notes of the chord immediately fall away and it just leaves one hanging in the air. And contemporary composers do this type of thing quite a lot. So that this one note is left over and that disappears. So you can see the melody comes in like a bass singing in the left hand when that piece continues. And let's see. Yeah. Okay. Now we'll skip to the G, the piece I was unhappy with my playing at the time and confessed to Bela. And I'm going to play it slowly and then a little faster. This is the way it goes slowly. Okay, so that's it slow. It goes faster than that. But back in those days, I couldn't do that. I mean, it really stretches you out and you just got to be everywhere. I couldn't do this. It just was beyond me for some reason. And I played with an orchestra. I'd done all types of things before that, but this particular passage just was a thicket I couldn't get through. It's really supposed to sound more like this. It goes that fast, you see. Then when you get to this, it goes that fast. So I could practice it nowadays and work it out, but just to show you what I was frustrated with at the time. I didn't really know how to relax my wrist and hands and let my wrist guide my fingers. I was trying to do it all with my fingers, and that's too slow. Pianists actually play from the wrist, and the fingers dangle after them in lots of passages. Okay. Bela was a very kind person with a wonderful sense of humor during personal conversations or class lectures. This gave his lectures a very enjoyable relaxed and informal atmosphere. Bela and an art professor at that time designed an art music appreciation class that met in a gym with bleachers so the entire art and music student body could attend together. Rozsa and the art professor alternated lectures every other class period. I think it just met once a week, I don't recall for sure. Students often seemed puzzled by a ritual in which we often engaged. Rozsa would ask a question, I would wait to see if anyone responded, and if not, then would answer it. Rozsa would look up at me, as I always said, at the back of the class on the high bleacher, and say, "Where did you learn that?" I would truthfully respond, "Mountain View." Knowing my childhood home was on a cotton farm near Mountain View, Oklahoma, he would then reply, "Mountain View, Mountain View," conflating my hometown with the high caffeine soft drink. This was his humorous and not so subtle way of cryptically reiterating his advice that I clean up my accent. At that time, I assumed was a southwestern Oklahoma Okie amalgam, because otherwise people would not think me intelligent. So he basically took issue with the way I pronounced mountain instead of mountain. So that's the only word he ever did. But I don't know how many times in class this occurred, and the students just looked puzzled, like, "What the heck is going on?" You know, and we would go on like nothing happened. Late in the term, Bela told me that every year he gave a lecture on Schoenberg to this class. He then surprised me by informing me he wanted me to have the distinction of giving this lecture in his place. I greatly enjoyed doing so, and afterwards, several art students approached me who later became personal friends. So, at this time, I'd like to play two fugues I wrote for Bela's counterpoint classes. And these were class assignments, so they weren't like composition assignments. You didn't bring them to him one week and he suggests improvements and you bring it back the next week or whatever. This was an assignment, so you did it, handed it in, he checked it and graded, and that was the end of the story. So the first fugue I'd like to play, it was the first one I wrote there as well. I dedicated to Dmitri Shostakovich, the Russian composer. And a fugue is a piece of music that, unlike the chords I talked about in this hierarchy of tonal music, that has a melody and then a chordal accompaniment, a fugue doesn't have the chordal accompaniment. It's all different voices or melodies going along at the same time, and the way they intertwine, they create the harmony of the piece as they go along. So you can have a 2-voice fugue, a 3-voice fugue, a 4-voice fugue, 5 or 6. I've heard Bach could even improvise a 6-voice fugue at the organ, which seems astounding. So this is a 3-voice fugue, and as I said, it's dedicated to Shostakovich, and Shostakovich in many of his works had a musical motif. So that's actually the code for his name. So Dmitri, starting with the D, the first note's D, then the next 3 notes spell out SCH in the German code for naming the different pitches in the chromatic scale. So this would be S, this would be C, which is middle C, and this would be H rather than B. It's called H in German. So to me, speaking of emotions or impressions, what does this motive sound to you? Is it happy or sad or anxious? Anyone have an idea?
Anxious.
Anxious? Okay. Yeah, I think it's a little sinister. Yeah, okay. So hidden in my fugue subject, the fugue subject is the tune the melody a fugue is composed from. So normally in a fugue, you have the tune just played by itself, so the listener hears the melody, the entire piece is going to be constructed from after that. And when you go on and another tune is playing, you have a voice below it that's not the tune, it's something else, and that's called counterpoint. So that's why this class was counterpoint. We're learning the rules of traditional counterpoint. So in this fugue subject, that's my fugue subject for that. So hidden inside the fugue subject is Shostakovich's motif for himself, but I altered it just a slight way because this is sad, but it's not sinister. So where it occurs is here. Here it is. And if I had, that would be it. But instead of going down to that lower note that makes it sinister, I came up with it at the end. And to me, that keeps it sad rather than sinister. And when the answer comes in, that's when the tune comes in, and it's supposed to be traditionally at a fifth above the initial tone. It comes in at A, it sounds like this, because if it's in the same key, it has to have different intervals from the original because it has to conform to the key it's in, which causes that to happen. So here it's a little different once again, but to me it still says sad, in other words. So this is the first fugue I wrote for Bela Rozsa. The next fugue I brought to Bela was dedicated to Carlo Gesualdo, who was a composer, an Italian composer who lived same time as Shakespeare, just after 1600. And Gesualdo, in the history of music, the composer Ernest Krennic said that if Gesualdo had been recognized throughout history as he should have been, the entire course of music history would have been totally different. And Gesualdo, at that time, wrote many madrigals, and madrigals were songs that were also contrapuntal. So you would have a 5-voice madrigal, and with Gesualdo's music, you might have a solo, you might have a duo, you might have a trio that appears, a quartet, and then all 5 people would be singing in a quintet. Most madrigals by other composers, you hear, most of the singers are singing all the time. Maybe there'd be one soloist and the others would accompany or whatever, but usually no one did anything like Gesualdo quite the same. That's what he's famous for. And he wrote, I think, 6 books of madrigals that are just fantastic. And another thing Gesualdo would do would be to, time is okay, going over an hour, I guess we have time. Another thing Gesualdo would do is the harmony would shift from spooky to joyous to you name it relative to the text that the people were singing. So an ordinary composer would have a sad text and the whole thing would be sad, but with Gesualdo, from one word to the next, how it changed. He would change the harmony and the fabric of the piece. So I decided, well, for this fugue, I'm going to do the same thing. So the fugue subject is this. And what happens with the subject, every time it comes in again, I modulate to the key that subject happens to start upon. And normally fugue doesn't do that. So each modulation with each subject goes along what's called the circle of fifths. So if we, for example, start with C, go down to F, then down to B flat, going down a fifth every time, B flat. We'll end up on C eventually. And in chess, that's the same as the closed knight tour of the chessboard. The knight starts off on a certain square, and it hops to every other square on the chessboard and then ends up back where it started. The circle of fifths, that's why they call it the circle of fifths. You end back where you started if you keep going on that route. I don't go all the way with this piece, but I start off as though I am. Another thing that happens here that mirrors Gesualdo, it starts off as a 3-voice fugue, but then midway into the piece, it turns into a major key and it really gets glorious and happy, and then it's 4 voices. Normally fugues don't do that either. So I broke almost all the rules of writing fugues, and Rocha passed it anyway. So that was good. But the one thing I think the piece does is we have what's called voice leading in music. And the voice leading, I think, in this piece is okay throughout. So maybe that was my saving grace. But anyway, I wrote it as I wanted and made a like it, so I'll try to play it here. what's next? Oh, I only have 2 pages to go, so I'm gonna keep you here all night after. So Rozsa once told me he was proud of a line in the Vienna game he had refuted, either in postal or tournament play. He said it was published, I think, either in Chess Openings Theory and Practice by Al Horowitz, or it could have been in one of the modern chess openings. And if so, that was before MCO 13, which before then they were all over the place. MCO 13 was the first modern chess openings. It was recognized that this is the one. You really want to study chess well, you got to have it. But I looked through all of those and tried to find it was never successful. He showed me the line on the chessboard, and I just don't remember it. I never was into the Vienna game all that much. But anyway, that's something he was really pleased with. So being an accomplished composer, pianist, and master or expert level chess player is a rare bird, a highly unusual aesthetic tripartite achievement as far as I know. In addition to Bela, there are only 2 such others I'm aware of that stand out in history. The late Russian composer, pianist Sergei Prokofiev, and the late Thomas Svoboda, a chess expert, composer, and pianist who taught music and composition 27 years at Portland State University. And by the way, I saw a grandmaster on YouTube only recently review several of Prokofiev's games. He was friends with Botvinnik and Smyslov and a lot of other top Soviet players. And this grandmaster said he evaluated Prokofiev's playing streak between 24 and 2,500. So that says a lot. You know, he was a composer, busy composing all the time, but he loved chess. Like Bela, Svoboda played voluminous correspondence chess, in his instance, much more than tournament play, which can be tricky with music concerts. A university music professor often needs to attend or perform on weekends when chess tournaments are also happening. I never met Svoboda because I live 5.5 hours south of him. As a pianist, Rozsa performed Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 with the university orchestra when he taught at Baylor University. One must be a great pianist to perform this famous and technically demanding piece. I never heard Bela perform, but saw him play student compositions and other class assignments often during his classes. One of my most memorable memories of him when he was at the piano reading a student score with his head tilted back so he could view the score sitting before him on the music rack through the bottom portion of his bifocals. So it was just sort of like this as he was playing. In this somewhat awkward position, he always sight-read these pieces flawlessly. As an instructor, the student piece veered into a passage that was easily reminiscent of a theme or passage within a well-known popular or classical piece of music. He would humorously break into an example of that as a lack of originality. So I saw him bring students to tears more than once when he always looked surprised when it happened. He never got me on that one. Okay, so now I'd like to end with 2 pieces I've written just for this occasion in memory of Bela, and they're called Bagatelles. A bagatelle is a short piece of music. If you look up a definition of it, it might say a trifle. But Beethoven's bagatelles were no trifles. They were really some profound pieces. So one thing they all have in common, I guess, are supposed to be short. So these will be fairly short pieces. The way I compose these pieces, I wanted to let you know, is just as Shostakovich had the motif for his that he used for his name and lots of music, I decided that I would use a musical way to find tones that represent Bela Rossa's name. So what I did was I took the alphabet starting with the letter A, and I took the musical chromatic tone also starting with the pitch A, and then expanded those out so each letter would correspond with a certain pitch. And so by doing that, I got different pitches for the word Bela, different pitches for the word Rozsa. Of course, Bela means someone with heart and intestinal fortitude. Rozsa means rose, so I thought I'd throw in what his name actually means. So anyway, that's how I found the pitches for Bela, and the B-E-L-A turned out to be this. And R-O-Z-S-A, Rosa, those are the last 5 pitches. You notice this pitch is in it twice because there are 2 A's in Bela Rozsa and all the other letters are different. So this piece, every pitch in this piece, in both bagatelles, are derived from those notes, and it never deviates from that. In the second bagatelle, there's one spot it didn't work, and so I put the note G in, but except with one exception, they're all the same coming out of that. So one thing that happens with all music or sound that we hear, that has 3 aspects. It has an attack, then it has a decay, and then an attack rather, then a continuance, and then the way it decays and fades away. So in most music that we hear the attack is the most important aspect of it. The sustaining after that can be pretty important because of the way chords last for a certain length of time, and the decay can be interesting at the end, but usually we hear the attack and part of the sustain basically. So when a bell rings, it's totally different. We hear the bell ring, but then we hear it vibrate throughout time much longer than we would other musical instruments. And so that's what this piece actually embodies to me. It's a series of bells going off around and within Bela Rossa's name. Luis Nunez, who played flute. He's a student here at TU. Thanks again.